I'm on a spaceship. How is? Whenever I think of like the vapidness of normies or the emptiness of the average Westerner today, I'll always think of Katy Perry on the spaceship with the date flower. Anyway, I should use this as like, do you remember what show was it? It was do you remember was it The Simpsons, where Homer went on an assertiveness course, and every time someone spoke over him, he was taught in the assertiveness course to go stop, and then he would make his point. So I'll use the Katy Perry flower to make a point. This will be like an avatar. Okay. Now, so I hope you're all keeping well. I hope you're doing well, and it's a very changeable. It was a monsoon here a half an hour ago, but now the sun is shining, so it's quite humid. Uh, Bank holiday weekend here in Ireland. I hope you're all keeping well, and great love and respect to all of you, and to best wishes to you and your families and your loved ones. And I hope your may abundance and contentment shine upon you, all you in the tribe. So when people ask me about the future, how do I feel about the future? Well, I feel positive about the future from my point of view, from the tribe type mind people, you guys' point of view, because you've seen through the mirage, and we've all found each other on this kind of life raft where we kind of like emotionally support. Many of you become friends and things like that through my social media and so on. I think that was the main reason that they shut me down on social media, is because I was actually, it was genuine. A genuine camaraderie was building out there that was not internet camaraderie. And so when I think of the future, I'm positive for fellas like us, guys like us, men and women like us, and their families. When I think about the normies and the average person in society, not so much. In fact, I think they're basically doomed. So I got thinking about, the other night I was thinking about this concept. Like, we live in an age where there's lots of consciousness, in our scene anyway, about this is, the end of a cycle. The Kali Yuga, the Babe's Prophecy, Mother Shipton, Baba Yaga, Vanga, whatever it's called. This woman's called Vanga. Uh, all that stuff. At the end of a cycle, the end of an age, the end of a yuga, to begin again. And there's definitely a feeling of that. And it's manifest in all kinds of ways. Now, within the normies, they're into the whole climate change doom thing. People like us, there's a great interest in the cataclysm, apocalyptic thing of the past. What took out the civilization before civilization. I don't know how anyone could not believe that there was when I say advanced, I don't mean, well, maybe they were to our level, 12,000 years ago. And, we have people doing fine work in that, Graham Hancock and lots of others. And, Joe Rogan has pushed this idea a lot on his podcast, and so it's reached huge numbers of people. The concept of the civilization before this civilization and what happened to it. And you have the whole thing of like an asteroid may have hit. They messed with technology, like the Edgar Casey thing of regarding the brothers of light and the brothers of shadow, whatever, and it caused problems, and the society collapsed in a cataclysm. We always air changes, pole flips, all that kind of stuff. You know, the catastrophism of Emmanuel Velikovsky, where, you know, the planet Venus was originally in an orbit between Mars and Earth, and something hit the planet, and it ended up between where it is now, and that's why the temperature is much higher than it should be. And there's all the prophecy and ancient mythology behind it. It's all great, very interesting stuff. But I don't know if that's what caused the cataclysms. And I'm trying to think, like, we'd have found, I think, very good proof of the cataclysm by now. I know there's, like, you know, they could that so-called impact site where that took the dinosaurs out 65 million years ago, that they tell us, that could have been maybe more recent than they're saying. We don't know. But what if, you know, the way our relationship, you know, like, normies can't extrapolate anything out from the initial feeling it gives them. So a normie, like a typical normie, they will say, they'll do things like, let's get married, they'll spend 100,000 on a wedding, and then complain that they don't have a down payment for an apartment or a house. That's a normie. Okay, that's how they are. They don't extrapolate. They have kids, and then they, like, a few years later, going, I'm working day and night to take care of these kids. They didn't think, you know, they didn't think down the line for that. This is how the normie is. The normie is like an animal. An animal that runs on impulse and superficial feels. Right? Superficial feels. And so, you know, but that's also that comes with danger, you know, because, you know, naivety is the fodder of catastrophe. So this is why previous generations, they learned about, you know, our great grandparents and beyond, they grew up in a world of dark fairy tales, you know, from the Germanic world, or Irish fairy lore, dark stories of ghosts from the, you know, the more sort of Anglo sphere would have been ghosts, you know, and this kind of thing, and uh, or even, you know, the consequences through retribution of sin. And they don't have that now. They don't have that wisdom. No one reads, well, I'm not saying no, I'm sure members of the tribe read Grimm's fairy tales to their kids, and they tell fairy lore to their kids, but, like, I'm talking about the average normie, right? They don't. So within this, they're already, you know, like Bruno Bettelheim in his book The Uses of Enchantment quite clearly states that this stuff is very powerful for the consciousness, the subconscious development of children. A lot of that began with Disney, taking the darkness out of these things. You know, like, you even think of, like, what's the name of it, Tinkerbell, the fairy. When you know, Americans, even ones who are into like when they who are into that fairy floor, they come to Ireland and they talk about about the fairies, and they'll think, like, it's Tinkerbell from Peter Pan, I think it is, from the cartoon from Disney, the Tinkerbell, right? Or the leprechaun, who's, like, you know, the shoe mender and the miner and the gold, where's me gold and all this. And they're absolutely shocked when you tell them that the fairy folklore of Ireland is demonic. It's like in the nature. The fairies are nearly all dark, and they're all dangerous, and they're all monsters. And people were terrified of them. And they're not the same as the English fae. Anyone in Ireland who uses the term fae to describe our fairies is like, you know, you need to get education. It's the she here. The people lived, the country folk, and still some do, lived in, I mean, I do, and I'm not country folk, but I did, I mean, I told you that story about Tommy Masterson and his brother, who in Ballymun, we met them on a soccer pitch one day, and they were like, we saw a fairy, and we laughed but knew they were telling the truth because they were quite shocked. And where they had seen it was up by the back of Trinity Woods, an ancient woodland sort of between Ballymun and Swords. It used to be a manor house, and that had the ruins had all, like, friezes of nymphs and satyrs and stuff like that embedded into the walls. and it is now completely covered in what was really an old growth forest with a river, the River Slade, running through it. And I says, well, where did you see it? Up, I saw a fairy, a little man, and we were laughing, but knew they were telling the truth. And they said we saw them up at the back of the back of the woods, before there used to be a stock, there used to be some industrial area beyond that, and then there was used to be stock car racing went on there, like a racetrack, and then there was the airport, Dublin Airport. There's a couple of fields. Well, Collinstown was the end of Santry and beginning Collinstown, and then years later, about 3 years ago, I'm looking up the Ordnance Survey site of where I lived, and just seeing the changes, all the development and all the buildings that have gone up ever since. And sure enough, most of the forest had been retained, Santry Demsna, but they had, at the back was the exact area where the Masterson brothers had told me that they saw the fairy. And the name of it was on the old map, the Fairy Glen. And to this day, it remains undeveloped. In fact, there's a soccer field next to it. I think Ballymun United play there. And they got like a little ground there which they want to develop into a small stadium. But the fairy woods are there. And I nearly fell off the seat when I saw that. So the lads saw a fairy. We didn't know by that name. We just knew it by part. It was the woods. We called it the forest of the woods. That's what it was to us, Santry Woods. Some people call it Trinity Woods, because Trinity College have their sports training ground near there for rugby and soccer and all that kind of thing. So, that was one of those things where life came full circle. But they were very frightened, the two boys that they seen. They weren't like, there wasn't a nice experience. They were very frightened by it. The two boys were frightened. And anyone I know who's seen fairies, I haven't, but they don't talk about it in Ireland, the she in a kind of a nice way. It's always like fear. So our ancestors, I don't know, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I'm getting there, right? So the kind of the folklorish sort of like undercurrent is what was used in society before it went all, was what was used in society before that, to create a subconscious software in people. You've heard me talk about this loads of times, going back over a decade in lectures and stuff. About that stuff, about the darkness of the world, the danger of the world, on a subconscious level, without terrifying them. So we don't have people like that anymore, but we in the tribe are like that. I'd like to think that my work into psychopathy and my book Puzzling People in particular, was almost like playing catch up, sort of bringing that Bruno Bettelheim world back into the modern world in terms of dealing with psychopathic situations and people and governments. So I'd like to think that I was part of that, part of a restoration of that at some level. Because certainly that was my plan. If you read the book, it's full of things about like folklore and mythology and all that kind of thing. Now, and this section on Lucifer that pissed people off, but and I'm glad, and pissed the Christians off, and because you talk about these things, you educate yourself, you learn, but so. Our mythology seems to be a lot of this is the end of a cycle. The tribe-minded folks like us who've gotten into the Graham Hancock and the whole people that Joe Rogan has on, and all these people talk about this is the end of a cycle, the end of an age, all that kind of thing. We're realizing it is. It absolutely is. Now, the only ingredient that's missing from that pot is, well, where's the grand event? Where's the asteroid? Where's the comet? Where's the big event? The solar flare. And I'm not saying that these things weren't coming or they don't exist. I'm just saying that seems to be the general assumption, that there's going to be a spectacular that will lead to the final great reset. Okay. What if it's like, most marriages that end, a relationship that end, you all know it never was like, it's rarely, you do have these situations where you walk in and, there's a fella in your bed banging your woman or she runs off with another fella. These things, that happens. But generally, most relationships, and even those kind of relationships, the hints are there, they deteriorate slowly. The family, the married couple, the relationship, it deteriorates slowly. The band, things they dissolve away slowly until they no longer exist. And what if that's how these catastrophisms happen? Now, what really brought this home for me was I was looking at the population collapse, the fertility rates collapses in Asia, particularly in India and in China. It's catastrophic collapse in India in particular and China. And suddenly, from being overpopulated, these countries are now facing a population collapse. So it's not, and it's happening everywhere. Fertility rates are going down everywhere, including Africa. So those people who say things like, what's happening is the Muslim world on the surface is having more babies because dog is rat will have 3 wives. So where, a Christian or an atheist or a Hindu family or pagan family might have 2 kids or 3 kids, they'll have 9 or 10 because the women are just, their dog is rat, a woman is just livestock. So they will have that. So that's only a superficial, on the surface increase. They're suffering from the same collapse in fertility rates as everyone else. That's all going to be balanced out as well. And this is why I think in recent times of kind of like the demographic changes in Ireland and Europe, I'm not particularly bothered by it now because we're all vanishing. So, I am bothered by it when I see I'm involved in waiting in a hospital list, then I'm going to have to pay privately a lot of money to get an operation that, because to wait the 12 months is just not feasible, and life has to return. So that's directly because of a bottleneck in the healthcare system here, and the public healthcare system here, that's forcing people like me to have to go private to buy expensive operations, because I just the immigrants have screwed up or bottlenecked the politicians have screwed it up by bringing in all these economic migrants, welfare tourists, and other than that, it's like I've kind of come to accept it in some kind of ways because we're all going, except us in the tribes. We're surviving. We'll survive, and people like us. Now, and I now know what it is. Well, not what, I have a theory of what it is. What's taken out. I gotta stop that. It'll become like we are the witches, something like that. So, the needlecraft, the transubstantiation of the sacred. Oh, the transubstantiation of the sacred needlecraft. You were a fool. You were daft. Remember those songs I made up during that we had a good laugh with during the Rona Chronicles? This should be called the Extinction Chronicles. Really, this should be the first video in the Extinction Chronicles. But the above mortality rates is absolutely astronomical with cancers in particular. I just saw some of the stats out of Australia. Literally everyone in Australia is dying of turbo cancers. It's astonishing. Or, waiting. And not everyone. The ones who got the transubstantiation, Remember there's another song we had. Sanctify me with your vaccine, sanctify me. Put the love of COVID Christ into my arms. Forget about the side effects. Civil servants, they knows best. Sanctify me with your vaccine, sanctify. Right. So that was another song. But yeah, the transubstantiation of the sacred needlecraft. Do you remember when it was all going on and we were here all talking about it? And I know people say, are you going to get a Tomo? And I go, what? I don't want it. I just don't want it. I don't trust it. Sure, it's not fully tested. And they go, sure, what? And the normies always said, but you don't know what you're putting in your body when you take an Advil or a Tylenol or a paracetamol. You don't really know what's in that either. And that was like, wow. That was, to me, that was like the Jonestown Kool-Aid moment. So what if they're voluntarily wiping themselves out? And what if this trigger to wipe themselves out is like, Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance. This notion that changes in species or changes in biology or in nature they already exist, but they unfold. They're like codes that are unlocked. What if the needlecraft was a voluntary mass suicide? Think about it. What if it was a voluntary mass suicide? That they, at some subconscious level, the 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 living force of the planet, Gaia, whatever you want to call it, the population reaches a critical mass, or an event happens. Now, I have my own theory, and it's a bullshit theory, but it's all I have to go with now. And I have as much evidence to support this as I have, names for the hairs on my arse. But so it's totally fucking arbitrary with a capital fucking A, right? I was wondering if not the atomic bomb, but the hydrogen bomb, the first hydrogen bombs that were set off, is what triggered the subconscious intelligence of the planet to say it's now time to take them out, to get them to kill themselves. And just like, so why do you a hydrogen bomb? Because when they detonated the first hydrogen bomb, and it's still incredible to think this, that they weren't sure if it was going to set fire to the whole world. Because the amount of hydrogen, and which is a highly explosive gas, that the amount of hydrogen in the atmosphere around the world, they weren't sure if the hydrogen bomb was detonated. There was a risk factor that might set the sky on fire, set the world on fire, that couldn't be stopped until all the hydrogen was depleted. So luckily it never happened, but it was almost like it was so, it like that triggered the subconscious like awareness of Gaia to do that. And then this is like, well, it's now time to kill humans. Now, when did this happen? It happened like around, mid-1950s, 1955, whatever. Around that time in the 50s. Soon after that, you had the legalization of abortion. You had the development of the contraceptive pill. You had the concept of the nuclear family. Two parents, two kids. That a concept of population reduction had began then. It began then. And then you had, just like Rudolf Steiner said, that the needlecrafts would be used to switch people off. Then you had the mass inoculations really took off around then, especially in the 60s. You had women who didn't breastfeed them because it was considered a third world dirty thing, and the kids are raised basically by Nestle. They didn't get mother's milk, they got Nestle and powdered milk, baby formula, Cow and Gate, all that stuff, Liga. And it was all, that's when the fertility rates start dropping. And then you had the veganism and the soy. And you think like, and then you had the population reduction consciousness, this Malthusian mentality from the likes of Bill Gates, even though the exact opposite has happened. This obsession with wiping humans out. Too many Africans, Live Aid, all that stuff. How do we get birth control into Africa? Blah, 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 blah. And selfish fuckers like me saying, oh, I don't want any kids because I'm having too much fun. But I mean, I'm honest about it. Also, I kind of raised my younger brothers and sisters when they were kids. And so that was kind of the parenting thing was kind of taken care of in me in many ways. And I had to really take care of myself as an adult. But they, that's what happened, And then they would say, well, this kind of thing, it's all the middle class who are having all the abortions and everything. So since the 50s on, and the only trigger I can think of is the hydrogen bomb, that this thing of like being less of us has taken off. And maybe that's what caused the great extinction in the past. Not so much a gigantic cataclysm event, but the slow removal of humans in their huge numbers. And that seems to be happening now. Okay, you could say, well, what's the fertility rates? Okay, you could say it's soy, but it's happening in countries where they don't consume large amounts of soy. And in Japan, they had huge fertility rates until recently, and that's a culture built on dietary soy. And I know it's fermented, but it's still soy. That's why Japanese women had very low rates of breast cancer because of the estrogen. But it's happening everywhere. It's happening to the Inuit. It's happening to tribes in the middle of Africa and the Amazon. That the populations they're just not having the children. So you can't really say it's diet or it's fluoride in the water or it's it's it is. I'm sure there's factors in everything, but it's not universal. Okay, you could have like all the contraceptive pill, like take a city like London that recycles its water, right? Because it doesn't have enough water. They recycle their sewage water. Now you could say, well, there's all the contraceptive pills, the women piss into the water and they can't remove that, so the men all get estrogen. Yeah, that's a very good point. But it's not universal. That wouldn't be okay for London. Vaccines might be okay for Ireland. But it doesn't explain why it's happening everywhere. And it's happening everywhere because I think that Gaia or the Earth Spirit or this unfoldment, this morphic resonance thing is saying it's now time to switch most of them off. Now, by extension, and I'm not trying to sound like that, okay? But then there's us, the ones who refused the transubstantiation of the sacred neoclav. And I'm quite adamant about it. I'm quite like, no, not going to happen. No. What we had, we held. No, it's not going to. So I'm pretty sure we've been selected as the survivors. Not because we're special or anything like that. We're wonderful. Like even the way they had the mass, like Australia. Remember that was that guy Andrews. That was his name, Dan Andrews down in Victoria. When Dan says you can't go, it's just the boy takeaway. You gotta get a takeaway. That fucking arsehole, right? That guy. Now how many deaths is he now responsible for? Just like Jacinda Ardern and all the rest of them, and all I'm saying, you get the needlecraft, you get your life back. You get the needlecraft, you get your extinction back. So those of us, I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for what we've done. That's not my personality type. I'm not the kind of person that goes around and says, "Oh, I'm great. I do this. I do." I'm not like that. I'm very modest. Anyone who knows me will tell me. Like I know lots of people have no idea I've written books or do things like this. They just think I'm just Tomo from down the road. That's just how I am. I don't go around. I'm not one of these, like some of these types that have like 100 subscribers on YouTube and they walk in the shop and you know how I am. These types. I'm not like that at all. But we should give ourselves credit for what happened. We should, because it was the most diabolical mass mind control thing ever foisted upon humanity, and it was incessant and 24/7, and all of us, including myself, were at times furious by it or annoyed by it. But the thing is, we don't have the Wuhan worms inside us eating away our neurology. We don't have Mother Hydra's babies. So again, it brings back to the cosmic thing. I always had this feeling, and it probably ties in with Rudolf Steiner's theory as well. But I always had this feeling that there was something, and those of you who've been around since the Rona Chronicles, I always was taught that there's something spiritual and there's something cosmic about this. When I mean by cosmic, I mean space. There's something, and I could Lovecraftian, Azathoth thought Narya Lepetep about this. There's something about space, and I have a very kind of a mystical relationship with space travel, like the Voyager spacecraft whose engines have switched on again after 21 years. They thought they were switched off, and is now detecting messages that don't seem to be of human origin, intelligent messages. And here we are. We're at the end, you know, and all the things like the shiftness and the shift in time, the space-time strangeness of things. You know, it seemed like January and February took forever, and now we're heading into June and July. All of a sudden, time, we know time is not linear, but it's really getting strange now. And, you know, the world is facing a complete population collapse. An Extinction Battalion is killing itself. I think that's why when people saw Katy Perry do that, and it's kind of hard to put the finger on, but it summed up the normies, how superficial and desperate they are to appear wise. Like when they said, I don't know what's in the needle crop, but I don't know what's in lots of things, you know. And now they have the Wuhan worms eating through their neurology. You know, if I've done one thing with these car videos, these kinds of videos, and all the stuff I've done, is to make you understand that you're living in an epic mythology. This Campbell-esque Jungian mythology, you're living in it. And nothing is average or ordinary. Everything has tremendous symbolism. Even that. Everything has tremendous symbolism. And to observe, pay attention, without fear, without loathing, without paranoia, just purely like, you know, like Ali G, you say, recognize, you know, that kind of thing. Booyakasha, recognize, that kind of thing. Recognize, that kind of thing. And you, rather than going with, you're no longer a member of the Extinction Battalions. You're the survivors in the future, who the people of the future will say, for some reason, certain humans survived. And in our case, and in the case of your children, I won't have any kids, but in the case of your children and grandchildren, it was, instead of this, it was sanguinosis. And what we have, we hold. And we did. So look after yourselves. I might make another video later on if it's not too busy. Take care. Love you all. Bye.